There's a certain magic that hangs in the air on Christmas Eve, isn't there? That special kind of electricity that makes you feel like anything could happen, that the ordinary rules of time and logic just might take the night off. For my family, that magic usually arrived wrapped in simple paper, tied with cheap ribbon, and placed carefully beneath a modest tree that never quite reached the ceiling of our small living room. Our Christmases were never extravagant, no lavish feasts or expensive gifts, but they were filled with a warmth that I've come to realize was more precious than any luxury could provide. It was in the smell of my mother's baking that would fill the house for days before, in the way my father would hum off-key carols while stringing lights that always had a few bulbs that refused to cooperate, and in the gentle chaos of 5 children trying to maintain some semblance of patience while waiting for morning. I was probably 10 or 11 years old when the strangest Christmas of my life began, though at the time, none of us could have known just how strange it would become. The snow had started falling just after dinner, soft and silent at first, then picking up intensity as the night wore on. Our windows were frosted with delicate patterns that made the streetlights outside glow like distant lanterns, and inside, the fire crackled in the hearth while we gathered around the radio listening to Christmas specials. My older sister was complaining about the itchy sweater our grandmother had knitted for her, my younger brothers were arguing about who got to put the angel on top of the tree, and I was trying to stay awake just long enough to catch a glimpse of Santa. Though at that age, I was already beginning to suspect the truth about the man in the red suit. What I didn't suspect was that the true magic of that particular Christmas Eve wouldn't arrive with jingling bells or a sleigh pulled by reindeer. No, our unexpected visitor would arrive with a different kind of fanfare entirely, one that would forever change how my family thought about tradition, chaos, and the unexpected gifts life sometimes delivers when we least expect them. Our little house sat on the edge of town, right where the paved streets gave way to rolling countryside dotted with farms and pastures. It was a peaceful setting, though the neighbors were few and far between. We were used to the quiet sounds of rural life, the roosters crowing at dawn, the distant barking of dogs, the occasional tractor rumbling down the road. But on this particular night, as we were gathering for our traditional Christmas Eve reading of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," a sound broke through the peaceful winter stillness that none of us had ever heard quite so close to our home before. It started as a commotion out back, a series of bleats that grew increasingly urgent and insistent. At first, we thought it might be one of the neighbors' animals that had gotten loose, but as the sounds continued, rising in pitch and intensity, curiosity began to eclipse our Christmas preparations. My father, ever the practical one, suggested we ignore it and continue with our evening. My mother, with her innate compassion for all creatures, big and small, couldn't shake the worry that something might be wrong. So it was decided that my oldest brother and I would investigate, armed with flashlights and our father's admonition to be careful and come right back. The back door swung open to a blast of cold air that made our breath visible in the beams of our flashlights. The snow had accumulated several inches by now, blanketing the yard in pure white silence except for the source of the commotion. And there, standing by the back fence, illuminated in the shaky circle of light from my brother's flashlight, was a goat. Not just any goat, but a magnificent creature with long, curved horns and a thick, shaggy coat that seemed to glow in the moonlight. It was looking right at us, its dark eyes wide with what I can only describe as a mixture of confusion and determination. The goat took a tentative step toward us, then another, until it was standing at the edge of the porch, its breath making small clouds in the cold air. I remember staring at it in disbelief, my mind racing to understand how a farm animal had ended up in our suburban backyard on Christmas Eve. My brother, ever more pragmatic, was trying to figure out who it might belong to and how to get it back to its rightful home before it caused any trouble. But the goat had other plans. With surprising agility, it hopped onto the porch, then nudged its way past my startled brother and into the warmth of our kitchen. Chaos erupted, as you might imagine. My mother yelped in surprise, my father rushed in from the living room, and my younger siblings, drawn by the commotion, tumbled into the kitchen to see what was happening. There we were on Christmas Eve, our carefully planned evening thrown into disarray by an uninvited, four-legged guest who seemed completely unfazed by the turn of events. The goat, for its part, appeared to be surveying its new surroundings with great interest, its nose twitching as it took in the smells of baking and pine needles and human activity. We stood frozen for a moment, a tableau of human bewilderment surrounding this single point of animal confidence. Then, as if making a decision, the goat walked calmly through the kitchen, past the half-eaten cookies on the counter, and into the living room where our Christmas tree stood waiting. There it stopped, looked up at the twinkling lights with what seemed like approval, and then much to our horror began nibbling on the lowest branches. Dear viewer, check if you're still subscribed to the channel. Sometimes subscriptions can be automatically cancelled, so it's always good to double-check. Also, consider becoming a channel member. As a member, you'll enjoy amazing benefits like watching our content ad-free. Plus, you can support our work by becoming a channel backer with a thanks contribution. Your help allows us to invest in better tools and raise the quality of our productions even further. Join us on this journey and become part of our community. Oh, and don't forget to comment with the city you're listening from and what time it is there. We'd love to know. In that moment, as we watched our family Christmas tradition being disrupted by this audacious creature, I remember thinking that this had to be some kind of mistake. That any minute now, the owner would arrive, apologize for the inconvenience, and lead their wayward pet back home. But as the minutes ticked by, and the goat showed no signs of leaving, a strange thing began to happen. The tension that had filled the room started to dissolve, replaced by something unexpected and wonderful. A giggle escaped my youngest sister, then another, until soon the entire family was laughing, not at the absurdity of the situation, but with it, as if this strange turn of events was somehow exactly what our Christmas Eve had been missing all along. Looking back, I now understand that this was the moment our Christmas story truly began, not with the arrival of the goat itself, but with our decision to embrace the chaos it represented. We had always prided ourselves on being a family that valued tradition and predictability, that stuck to the plans we made and the routines we kept. But in that moment, watching a goat eat our Christmas tree decorations while we stood laughing instead of scolding, something shifted. We became, if only for one night, a family that could find joy in the unexpected, that could appreciate the beauty of a plan gone wonderfully wrong. The goat, sensing our change of heart, seemed to settle in. It eventually lost interest in the tree and instead curled up on the rug in front of the fireplace, its sides rising and falling with steady, peaceful breaths. We gathered around it, not knowing what else to do, and continued with our Christmas Eve traditions, though now they felt different, somehow richer, more meaningful, infused with the magic of the absurd. We read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" with extra enthusiasm, sang carols with more gusto, and even left an extra cookie on the plate for Santa, just in case our unexpected visitor had worked up an appetite. As we finally made our way to bed that night, the goat still resting comfortably by the hearth, I remember my father whispering to my mother that we'd figure out what to do in the morning. My mother just smiled and said some blessings come in unexpected packages. Little did we know that this was no ordinary blessing, but the beginning of the most memorable Christmas our family would ever experience, a Christmas that would become part of our family lore, retold at every gathering for years to come, a story that somehow managed to capture the perfect balance of chaos and joy, disruption and connection. I often think about that night, about the way something so completely unexpected could change everything we thought we knew about family, tradition, and the magic of Christmas. Sometimes I wonder if the goat knew what it was getting into when it hopped onto our porch, or if it was just as lost and confused as we were. In the end, it doesn't really matter. What matters is how that strange Christmas Eve taught us something beautiful about life, that sometimes the greatest gifts arrive not in perfectly wrapped packages, but in the messy, unpredictable, utterly surprising moments that remind us to laugh, to embrace the unexpected, and to find joy in the things we never planned for. And that, I've come to realize, is the true spirit of Christmas, not in the perfection of the traditions we keep, but in the magic of the moments we never saw coming. Querido espectador, confira se você ainda está inscrito no canal. Às vezes, a inscrição pode ser cancelada automaticamente, então é sempre bom verificar. Aproveite e se torne um membro do canal. Como membro, você terá benefícios incríveis, como assistir aos nossos conteúdos sem anúncios. Além disso, você pode apoiar nosso trabalho sendo um financiador do canal com um "Valeu". Sua ajuda nos permite investir em ferramentas melhores e elevar a qualidade da produção dos nossos conteúdos. Junte-se a nós nessa jornada e faça parte da nossa comunidade. Ah, e conta pra gente aí nos comentários de que cidade você está escutando esta história e que horas são por aí agora. As the last candle was extinguished and we made our way upstairs to our bedrooms, the goat remained by the fireplace, a silent guardian of our unconventional Christmas Eve. I remember lying in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sound of its breathing mixed with the familiar ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs, wondering what morning would bring. Would the owner come to claim their wayward animal? Would we be stuck with a farm animal in our suburban home? And perhaps most importantly, what would happen to our carefully planned Christmas day? My parents stayed up later than usual, their voices a low murmur from the kitchen as they discussed the situation over cups of tea. I couldn't make out the words, but I could sense the tension in their tones, my father's practical concerns battling with my mother's compassionate nature. The goat, for its part, seemed completely unfazed by the human drama unfolding around it, occasionally letting out a soft, contented sigh that would echo through the quiet house. In the morning, we discovered that the goat had made itself quite at home. It had helped itself to the cookies left out for Santa, nibbled on the corner of the wrapping paper under the tree, and somehow managed to knock over a vase of poinsettias without breaking it. The evidence of its midnight wanderings was scattered throughout the living room, yet there was something charming about the chaos it had created, as if this unexpected guest had added its own special touch to our holiday decorations. Breakfast was a study in contrasts. On one hand, it was our usual Christmas Eve breakfast of pancakes and sausages, a tradition we'd maintained for as long as I could remember. On the other hand, there was the ever-present reality that a farm animal was currently sleeping on our living room rug, its presence casting a shadow of absurdity over our morning routine. My younger siblings were fascinated, alternating between eating their pancakes and peeking through the doorway at the sleeping creature. My older sister, ever the teenager, was mortified, convinced that our neighbors would find out and we'd become the laughingstock of the entire town. By mid-morning, the snow had stopped falling, leaving a pristine white blanket over the world outside. My father, armed with a leash he'd found in the garage, meant for our long-departed dog, attempted to coax the goat outside. But the animal had other ideas. It followed him willingly enough to the back door, then planted its feet firmly on the porch, refusing to budge. It was as if it had decided our home was its new domain, and no amount of persuasion could convince it otherwise. My mother, watching the standoff from the kitchen window, shook her head. "I think he's chosen us, John," she said, using my father's first name in a way she only did when she meant business. "Maybe we should consider this fate." My father sighed, running a hand through his already thinning hair. "Fate? Martha, this is a farm animal. We live in a suburban neighborhood. We can't exactly keep a goat in our backyard." "Why not?" my youngest brother piped up, his mouth full of pancake. "It could be our pet goat." The suggestion was met with a mixture of groans and interested murmurs from the rest of us. My father just looked more troubled than ever, his practical mind clearly running through all the reasons why this was a terrible idea while his heart seemed somehow intrigued by the possibility. As we debated the pros and cons of goat ownership, the animal itself had apparently reached its own decision. With surprising agility, it hopped off the porch and trotted around the side of the house, returning moments later with something clutched in its mouth. We watched in astonishment as it dropped a slightly damp, folded piece of paper onto the kitchen floor. It was a note, written in looping, elegant script on what looked like parchment paper. "Sorry about the intrusion," it read. "Barnaby gets lonely this time of year and has a habit of escaping. He's yours for Christmas Day if you'll have him. The gate to the pasture down the road has frozen shut, just bring him back when you're done. Happy holidays, Eleanor." We passed the note around, each of us reading it with growing disbelief. Eleanor turned out to be the elderly woman who lived 3 properties down, a reclusive widow we rarely saw except for when her lawn service came once a month. Barnaby, apparently, was her pet goat, a Christmas present from her late husband many years ago that had become something of a local legend for his occasional escapes. The implications of the note weren't immediately clear to us children, but my parents exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They had been worried about responsibility, about what keeping a goat would mean for our family. Now, Eleanor had handed them a temporary solution, one that still left us with a goat for Christmas Day, but without the long-term commitment. "Well," my mother said finally, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I suppose this is what they mean when they talk about Christmas miracles." My father grumbled something about the impracticality of the situation, but even I could see the reluctant amusement in his eyes. The goat Barnaby apparently watched us with an expression that seemed almost human in its understanding, as if he knew he'd won this round. And so it was that we found ourselves with a goat for Christmas. The preparations continued, though now with a new energy, a sense of adventure that had been missing before. My younger siblings couldn't stop talking about what we should do with Barnaby. My older sister was trying to maintain her cool demeanor while secretly asking me to take pictures of the stupid goat, and my parents were alternating between practical concerns and unexpected delight. By late afternoon, the house was filled with the delicious smells of roasting turkey and baking pies, the air thick with anticipation. The presents had been wrapped and placed beneath the tree, which was looking slightly worse for wear after Barnaby's midnight feast but still beautiful in its own way. And in the corner of the living room, Barnaby the goat watched it all with what seemed like genuine interest, occasionally bleating softly as if commenting on the proceedings. As dusk began to settle and we lit the candles for our Christmas Eve dinner, something remarkable happened. Barnaby approached the table and stood patiently, not making a sound, just watching us with those intelligent dark eyes. My father, ever the jokester, pulled out an extra chair and set a small plate of vegetables on it, which Barnaby delicately nibbled throughout the meal. It was absurd, ridiculous even, but in that moment, sitting around the table with our unexpected guest, it also felt somehow perfect, complete. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Henderson from next door, her voice tight with concern. "I hope I'm not disturbing your Christmas Eve," she began, "but I was wondering if you'd heard anything unusual tonight? There's been some commotion over on Elm Street, and I thought I heard something that sounded like a goat." My father glanced at Barnaby, who was currently trying to steal a carrot from the counter. Actually, Mrs. Henderson, he said, a note of mischief in his voice, we have been keeping somewhat unusual company tonight. Would you like to come over and meet him? The next thing we knew, our living room was filled with neighbors, all of whom had their own stories about Barnaby's appearances over the years. It turned out that Eleanor's goat was something of a local celebrity, known for showing up at school events, the post office, and even once at the mayor's office during a town meeting. As we shared stories and laughed together, something shifted in our little community. In that moment, with a goat serving as the unlikely catalyst, we weren't just neighbors anymore, we were a community, brought together by the most unexpected of circumstances. As our guests finally departed, wishing us a Merry Christmas and promising to return in the morning, we found ourselves standing together as a family, looking at each other with a new understanding. This Christmas was going to be different from any we'd experienced before, messier, more unpredictable, and somehow more real than any we could have planned. The clock on the mantel struck 10 as we prepared for bed, and with it came a sudden stillness that settled over the house. Barnaby, sensing the change, curled up once more by the fireplace, his breathing slow and steady. As we turned off the lights and made our way upstairs, I couldn't help but wonder what midnight would bring. For we all knew, deep down, that with a goat in the house on Christmas Eve, the night was far from over. The clock on the mantel had just struck 11 when we finally decided to call it a night. My mother insisted on leaving a bowl of water and some of the vegetables we'd planned for Christmas dinner in the corner for Barnaby, while my father carefully placed a blanket over the shaggy creature, who had made himself comfortable by the dying embers of the fireplace. Just for tonight, my father muttered more to himself than to anyone else. Just until morning. My older sister rolled her eyes as we headed upstairs, muttering something about the circus coming to town, but even I could see the hint of a smile playing on her lips. The rest of us were buzzing with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. What would happen if Barnaby got into trouble during the night? Would he actually stay put, or would we wake up to find him chewing on the furniture, or worse, on each other? I must have been drifting off to sleep when I first heard a soft, rhythmic scraping sound coming from downstairs. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling or the wind outside, but as it continued, I became more awake, more alert. It was followed by a soft bleating, then a series of thumps that shook the floorboards beneath my bed. I sat up, straining to listen, and soon recognized the sounds for what they were. Barnaby was on the move. Slipping out of bed, I tiptoed to the doorway and listened. The noises had grown louder now, accompanied by what sounded like tinsel being shaken vigorously. I could hear my parents stirring in their room, my mother whispering, "What on earth is that?" and my father sighing, "I told you we should have put him in the garage." Curiosity tension la fear, and I crept down the stairs, one step at a time, until I could see into the living room. And there, illuminated by the twinkling Christmas lights, was Barnaby. He had somehow managed to untie the string of lights around the tree and was now batting at them with his horns, sending a shower of sparks and tinsel cascading onto the rug. The lower branches of the tree were stripped bare of ornaments, which he had knocked to the floor and was now nudging with his nose as if playing a game. For a moment, I just stood there, watching the absurd scene unfold. Then, Barnaby turned, caught sight of me, and froze. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, me in my pajamas, him covered in tinsel and Christmas ornaments. Then, as if deciding I wasn't a threat, he went back to his game, batting at the lights with renewed enthusiasm. That's when I woke up my brothers. Within minutes, our sleepy household was transformed into a chaotic scene of children in various states of dress and undress, all drawn by the commotion from downstairs. My parents appeared last, my father looking resigned but not entirely surprised, my mother rubbing her eyes and trying to make sense of the Christmas carnage before us. "Barnaby," she said, her voice thick with sleep but her expression one of fond exasperation. "What have you done to the tree?" The goat, as if understanding he'd been caught, stopped his antics and looked up at her with those dark, intelligent eyes. Then, to our complete astonishment, he let out a series of bleats that sounded almost like words, like he was trying to explain himself, or perhaps apologize. My youngest brother started laughing, then clapping his hands with delight. "He's talking. The goat's talking," he exclaimed. My older sister just groaned and buried her face in her hands. "This is the most mortifying Christmas of my entire life," she muttered. As if sensing the shift in human emotion, Barnaby suddenly became agitated. He trotted to the front door and began scratching at it with his hooves, then turned and looked back at us expectantly. My father, ever practical, went to open it, thinking the goat wanted to go outside. But Barnaby had no intention of leaving. Instead, he bolted past my father and out onto the porch, where he began bleating at the top of his lungs, a sound that, in the quiet winter night, carried for what seemed like miles. And that's when the real chaos began. One by one, lights began flickering on in the houses up and down our street. Curtains were drawn back, faces appeared at windows, and soon we could hear voices calling out in confusion and concern. Within minutes, our quiet street was alive with activity as neighbors emerged, some in bathrobes, others in various stages of dress, all drawn by the sound of the goats bleating. My father stepped onto the porch, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Sorry about the noise, everyone," he called out. "It's just Eleanor's goat, he got loose again." The response was a wave of recognition and laughter. "Barnaby," someone shouted from across the street. "I should have known." "You can have him back in the morning," my father continued, though by now the entire neighborhood had gathered, forming an impromptu gathering on our snow-covered lawn. "We were just watching him for the night." This announcement was met with good-natured teasing and knowing nods. It seemed everyone had a story about Barnaby's adventures, and each story seemed more outrageous than the last. There was the time he'd gotten into the mayor's office during a town meeting, the time he'd shown up at the elementary school during recess, the time he'd somehow managed to get into the post office and eat all the Christmas stamps. As we stood there, surrounded by our neighbors, watching Barnaby prance around in the snow like he owned the place, something remarkable happened. The divisions between houses, between people who barely spoke to each other most of the year, seemed to dissolve. We were no longer just neighbors, we were a community, brought together by the most unlikely of Christmas guests. My mother, watching the scene unfold from the doorway, had tears in her eyes. "You know," she whispered to me, "this is what Christmas is really about. Not the presents or the tree, but coming together." Just then, Barnaby decided to take the celebration to the next level. He began running from house to house, stopping at each one to bleat loudly, as if inviting everyone to join the party. Soon, the street was filled with laughter and music as people emerged from their homes, some bringing out hot cocoa, others instruments, and before we knew it, we had an impromptu Christmas carol sing-along right there on our snow-covered street. I remember standing there, bundled up in my coat, watching my father laugh with Mr. Henderson from next door, my mother talking excitedly with Mrs. Gable from across the street, and my younger brothers and sister building a snow goat with our new friend. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of something bigger than just my family, part of a community that, despite our differences, could come together and celebrate the magic of Christmas in the most unexpected of ways. As the last carol faded into the winter night, and our neighbors began drifting back to their homes, Barnaby once again found his way to our porch. He looked up at us with those dark, intelligent eyes, as if to say, "Well, that was fun." Then, with a final, contented sigh, he hopped back inside and curled up by the fireplace, as if this whole midnight adventure had been nothing more than a typical Tuesday night. My father closed the door and leaned against it, shaking his head with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "Well," he said, "that's one Christmas Eve I'll never forget." "Neither will I," I thought to myself, watching the goat sleep peacefully by the dying embers. "Neither will I." As we finally made our way back to bed, the house was quiet except for Barnaby's gentle breathing and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock. But as I lay there, listening to the unfamiliar sounds, I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was coming. The night might have reached its peak of chaos, but somehow I knew we hadn't seen the last of our Christmas goat's surprises. After all, it was still Christmas Eve, and magic has a way of revealing itself in the most unexpected of moments, especially when you're least expecting it. As dawn began to break, casting a soft pink glow over the snow-covered landscape, something remarkable happened. Barnaby, who had been sleeping peacefully by the fireplace all night, suddenly stood up and stretched in a way that was almost comically human. He then walked to the center of the room, where the Christmas tree stood somewhat diminished from his earlier decorations feast, and began scratching at the floor with his hoof. At first, we thought he was just being playful, but as he continued, a pattern began to emerge. He wasn't random in his movements, there was a purpose to his scratching, a deliberate rhythm that seemed almost intentional. My father, ever the practical one, suggested we take him outside, but my mother stopped him. "Wait," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Look at this." Barnaby had scratched a perfect circle in the hardwood floor, and within it, what looked like a star. Then, to our complete astonishment, he began to push the Christmas tree gently but insistently toward the center of the circle. The tree, which had been standing in the corner of the room near the fireplace, moved slowly across the floor as Barnaby nudged it with his nose and sides. "What on earth is he doing?" my older sister asked, though her usual sarcasm was replaced by genuine curiosity. None of us had an answer, but we watched in stunned silence as Barnaby continued his work. When the tree was positioned in the exact center of the circle he'd scratched, he backed away and stood back, as if admiring his handiwork. Then, he looked directly at my mother, tilted his head, and let out a soft, questioning bleat. My mother, tears streaming down her face, walked toward the tree and picked up a small, slightly charred ornament from the floor, an angel with broken wings that had been her mother's favorite. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "I completely forgot." She explained that when she was a little girl, her family had a tradition of placing the Christmas tree in the center of the room on Christmas morning, surrounded by a circle of evergreen branches and lit with candles. It was a tradition she'd loved as a child, but when her parents passed away and she started her own family, the tradition had been lost among the more practical aspects of modern Christmas celebrations. "I haven't thought about that in 50 years, she said, her voice thick with emotion. How could he possibly know? The question hung in the air as we all stared at the goat, who seemed completely unfazed by the human drama unfolding around him. He simply blinked his dark eyes and let out another soft bleat, as if to say, "Well, of course I know." My father, who had been watching with growing astonishment, finally spoke. "You don't suppose, do you think he could have known your mother?" My mother laughed, though there was a hint of wonder in her voice. "Mother passed away before we moved to this neighborhood, John. And Eleanor's only lived down the road for a few years. There's no way they could have known each other." But as she spoke, a memory surfaced, one she hadn't thought about in decades. Her mother had loved animals, especially goats, and had often told stories about a particularly clever goat they'd had when she was a girl. She used to say that goats had a kind of wisdom, my mother mused, that they could sense things humans couldn't. She called them God's messengers. The implication was clear, though no one dared say it outright. Could it be possible that this goat, this Barnaby, had been drawn to their home not by accident, but by some unseen force? That his presence on Christmas Eve was not a random event, but part of some larger, more mysterious plan? As if sensing the direction of our thoughts, Barnaby walked over to the fireplace and nudged a loose brick with his nose. When it didn't move, he used his horns to push, and with a grating sound, the brick slid aside, revealing a small, hidden compartment. My father, ever the investigator, reached inside and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was a journal, its pages yellowed with age, and as he opened it, we could see it was filled with elegant, looping script, the same handwriting as Eleanor's note. "Barnaby must have found this when he was exploring the house last night," my mother said, reaching for the journal. "I wonder what it contains." She began to read aloud, her voice soft with emotion. December 24, 1948. Today I visited Martha's mother, as I do every year on Christmas Eve. We sat by the fire, drank tea, and shared memories of those we've lost. She told me about her family tradition of placing the Christmas tree in the center of the room, surrounded by evergreen branches and lit with candles. "It brings the whole family together," she said, "reminds us that love transcends even death." We talked about our children, our hopes and dreams for them. She worries about Martha, you see. Thinks she's too practical, too focused on the material things of life. "She needs to learn to embrace the unexpected," she said. "That's where true happiness lies." I promised I would look out for Martha, try to remind her of the magic she's forgotten. My mother's voice caught, and she had to pause, wiping tears from her eyes. "This is Eleanor's mother's journal," she whispered. "She was Martha's mother's friend. She wrote this the year before she passed away." We passed the journal around, each of us reading the entries with growing wonder. It was filled with stories of Christmas past, of traditions both grand and simple, of love and loss and the enduring bonds of family. In one entry, Eleanor's mother had written about a goat, a special goat that had belonged to her own grandmother, a goat that was said to have brought comfort and healing to those in need. "Goats have a special connection to the spiritual world," the entry read. "They can sense what we've lost, what we yearn for, and they bring messages from beyond. If a goat comes to your door on Christmas Eve, it is a sign that someone from the other side is watching over you, bringing you the gift of remembrance and joy." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. We all looked at Barnaby, who was currently attempting to climb onto the sofa, as if he understood he was the subject of our conversation. "So, you think?" my father began, unable to finish the sentence. "I think," my mother said, her voice filled with a renewed sense of wonder, "that this Christmas was meant to be different. That your mother reached out to us through Eleanor's family, through this remarkable creature, to remind us of what truly matters." My older sister, who had been watching with growing interest, finally spoke. "You know," she said, "for the past few years, I've been dreading Christmas. It just feels empty somehow. Like we're going through the motions, but there's no heart in it." Her admission hung in the air, vulnerable and raw. We all nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. In our rush to create the perfect Christmas, the right presents, the perfect meal, the ideal decorations, we had somehow lost the magic that had made Christmas special when we were children. "But this," my younger brother said, gesturing around the room at the slightly damaged tree, the scattered ornaments, and the goat currently trying to eat the tinsel, "this feels real. This feels alive." And in that moment, something shifted within us. The frustration and embarrassment we had felt about our unconventional Christmas began to fade, replaced by a sense of wonder and gratitude. This was not the Christmas we had planned, but perhaps it was the Christmas we needed, a reminder that magic doesn't come from perfection, but from authenticity, from connection, not things. Barnaby, as if sensing the change in energy, trotted over to the tree and began gently nudging it with his nose again. This time, instead of resisting, we helped him. Together, we moved the tree to the center of the room, exactly where Barnaby had indicated with his earlier scratching. Then, we gathered evergreen branches from the yard and arranged them in a circle around the tree, just as my mother's mother had done so many years ago. As we worked, something remarkable happened. The barriers between us, between parent and child, between sibling and sibling, began to dissolve. We weren't just decorating a house anymore, we were connecting with generations past, with memories long buried, with each other in ways we hadn't in years. When we finally stood back to admire our handiwork, the room was transformed. The Christmas tree, positioned in the center of the room and surrounded by fragrant evergreen branches, glowed with a radiance that had nothing to do with the lights and everything to do with the intention behind it. "This is beautiful," my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This is exactly how it was supposed to be." Barnaby, satisfied with our work, curled up by the tree, his breathing slow and steady. As we stood there, basking in the warmth of the fire and the magic of the moment, I couldn't help but wonder what other surprises this extraordinary Christmas might have in store for us. After all, it was still Christmas morning, and with a goat who seemed to carry messages from beyond, who knew what miracles might still be waiting to unfold? The soft glow of dawn had fully given way to morning now, and the world outside was bathed in the clear, bright light of a winter day. But in our living room, surrounded by the transformed Christmas tree and the gentle presence of Barnaby, it felt as if we were in a different kind of time altogether, a time when magic was possible, when connections transcended the ordinary, when love could reach across generations to remind us of what truly matters. As we stood there, united in the warmth of the moment, I couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of our Christmas miracle. After all, with a goat who seemed to carry messages from the beyond and a journal that revealed connections we never knew existed, who knew what other wonders might still be waiting to unfold on this most extraordinary of Christmas mornings? The bell above the front door suddenly rang, sharp and clear, breaking through the sacred stillness of our moment. We all froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. Who could possibly be at our door on Christmas morning? And what new chapter of this incredible Christmas story might they bring with them? The bell above the front door suddenly rang, sharp and clear, breaking through the sacred stillness of our moment. We all froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. Who could possibly be at our door on Christmas morning? And what new chapter of this incredible Christmas story might they bring with them? My father, ever the cautious one, approached the door slowly, peering through the curtain before opening it. "Eleanor," he exclaimed, his voice filled with surprise. "What are you doing here? We were just about to bring Barnaby back to you." The elderly woman standing on our porch was bundled in a thick coat, her cheeks flushed from the cold, but her eyes sparkled with a knowing warmth. "I know, John," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it before. "But I couldn't wait until later. I had to come see for myself." She stepped inside, her eyes immediately drawn to the Christmas tree positioned in the center of the room, surrounded by the evergreen circle we had just created. "Oh, my," she whispered, a hand flying to her mouth. "You remembered." My mother rushed forward to help her with her coat, her voice filled with emotion. "How could we forget? After everything, after Barnaby." Eleanor nodded, her gaze fixed on the goat, who had stood up and was now trotting toward her with an unusual gentleness. "Barnaby has always been special," she said, reaching out a wrinkled hand to stroke his head. "My husband gave him to me the first Christmas after he passed away. Said I needed someone to keep me company when the house felt too empty." She looked around the room, her eyes lingering on each of us in turn. "He's been part of our family ever since. Though I have to admit, his Christmas Eve adventures have become somewhat legendary around here." A moment of understanding passed between them, my mother and Eleanor, two women connected by loss, love, and the unexpected wisdom of a goat who had somehow bridged generations. "You know," Eleanor said, turning to my mother, "when I wrote that note last night, leaving Barnaby with you, I had no idea what would happen. But something told me it was right. Like he needed to be here, with you, today." My father, who had been watching the exchange with growing curiosity, finally spoke. "Is that why you came? To check on Barnaby?" Eleanor smiled, a warm, knowing expression that seemed to light up her entire face. "Partly. But I also came because I remembered something from my husband's journal. Something he wrote about the first Christmas we had Barnaby." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn book different from the journal we had found in the fireplace, but similar in appearance. "He wrote that goats have a way of bringing people together, of healing what's broken. Especially on Christmas." As she spoke, I noticed something remarkable happening in the room. The tension that had always existed between my older sister and my father, the unspoken conflict about her future, about her choices, seemed to dissolve in the warm glow of the Christmas lights. My sister, who had been standing near the window, arms crossed in her usual defensive posture, now stepped closer to the group, her expression softening. He wrote that Christmas miracles don't always come in the packages we expect, Eleanor continued, her voice filled with emotion. Sometimes they come in the form of unexpected visitors, of moments that remind us what truly matters. My father, who had been standing with his arms crossed in a mirror of my sister's usual posture, now reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. I've been so focused on what I think is best for you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I forgot to ask what you want. My sister, tears welling in her eyes, turned to face him. I know you want what's best for me, she said. But sometimes I feel like I'm living your dream, not mine. In that moment, with the goat standing between them as a silent mediator, something shifted. The wall that had grown between them over years of unspoken expectations and disappointments began to crumble, replaced by a new understanding, a new connection. That's what this Christmas is about, my mother said, her voice filled with wonder. Not about getting everything right, but about being real with each other. About embracing the unexpected. Eleanor nodded, her eyes twinkling. That's exactly what my husband used to say. He used to say that the best Christmases were the ones where things went wrong, because that's when you found out what you were really made of. As if responding to her words, Barnaby let out a soft bleat and walked over to the Christmas tree. He nudged a box that was wrapped in plain brown paper, unadorned and unassuming. What's that? My younger brother asked, reaching for it. My mother picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly as she unwrapped it. Inside was a small, wooden angel similar to the one that had been damaged the night before, but this one was intact, its wings spread wide as if ready to fly. I found this in the attic, Eleanor said, her voice filled with emotion. It was my mother's Christmas angel. She used to say it had special powers, that it could bring families together, heal what was broken. My mother gasped, tears streaming down her face. This was my grandmother's angel, she whispered. The one she used to tell me about. The one that was lost when we moved. Eleanor nodded. Your mother gave it to my mother years ago, as a symbol of their friendship. When my mother passed away, I found it among her things. I kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment to return it. In that moment, as the angel passed from Eleanor's hands to my mother's, something extraordinary happened. The room seemed to fill with a warm, golden light, and for a brief moment, it felt as if we weren't alone, that we were surrounded by the spirits of those who had come before us, watching over us, celebrating with us. My father, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of surprise and emotion, suddenly spoke. You know, he said, I think this is the best Christmas we've ever had. My sister nodded, a genuine smile lighting up her face for the first time that day. Me too, she said. Even with the goat eating our tree and waking up the whole neighborhood. We all laughed, then a genuine, heartfelt laugh that seemed to echo through the room, bouncing off the walls and settling deep within us. In that moment, we were more than just a family, we were a community, connected by love, by memory, and by the extraordinary wisdom of a goat who had somehow known exactly what we needed. As we stood there, united in the warmth of the moment, Eleanor suddenly clapped her hands together. Oh, I almost forgot. I brought something else for you. She reached into her pocket again and pulled out a small, silver bell. My husband used to say that if you ring a bell on Christmas morning, it brings good luck for the whole year. She handed the bell to my father, who looked at it with wonder. What are we supposed to do with it? He asked. Ring it, Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling. And make a wish. A real wish, from the heart. My father took the bell, his hand trembling slightly. He raised it high above his head, and as he brought it down, a clear, resonant sound filled the room, a sound that seemed to vibrate through our very beings. I wish, he said, his voice filled with emotion, that we could always remember this feeling. That we could always be this present, this connected, with each other. As the last echo of the bell faded away, something remarkable happened. Barnaby let out a soft bleat and walked to the center of the room, where he stood perfectly still, as if frozen in time. Then, to our complete astonishment, he began to glow, not with fire or light, but with a warm, golden radiance that seemed to emanate from within him. We all stood there, watching in stunned silence as the goat's form seemed to blur, to transform, until he was no longer just a goat but something more, something that transcended our understanding. When the glow finally faded, Barnaby was standing there as he had been before, but now he seemed different, older, wiser, as if he had carried us all to some other place and brought us back changed. As we stared at him, trying to process what we had just witnessed, Barnaby turned and looked directly at me. Then, with a final, knowing nod, he trotted to the door, where Eleanor was waiting. I think it's time for me to go, Eleanor said, her voice filled with emotion. Barnaby has completed his mission for this Christmas. My father opened the door, and together they stepped out onto the porch. For a moment, they stood there, talking in low voices that we couldn't make out, then Eleanor turned and walked back down the path, leaving Barnaby alone on the porch. The goat looked back at us one last time, his dark eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed almost human, then turned and trotted away, disappearing into the snow-covered landscape as if he had never been there at all. We stood there, watching where he had been, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then, my mother spoke, her voice filled with wonder. Do you think it was really him?" My father nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I think sometimes the most ordinary things can carry the most extraordinary magic." As we turned back to our transformed Christmas tree, positioned in the center of the room and surrounded by the evergreen circle, something in us had shifted. We were no longer just a family going through the motions of Christmas, we were a family connected by something deeper, something that had been awakened by the unexpected arrival of a goat on Christmas Eve. And as we stood there, basking in the warmth of the fire and the magic of the moment, I couldn't help but wonder what other surprises this extraordinary day might have in store for us. After all, it was still Christmas Day, and with a goat who seemed to carry messages from beyond and a silver bell that had brought us together, who knew what other wonders might still be waiting to unfold? The days that followed Christmas were filled with a quiet magic that seemed to linger long after Barnaby had disappeared. We found ourselves moving through our routines differently now, as if something fundamental had shifted within us. The house felt different too, not empty, but changed, imbued with a significance that the ordinary decorations and furnishings couldn't quite contain. My father, who had been so resistant to the chaos Barnaby had brought into our lives, became the most changed of all. He started getting up earlier in the mornings, not to work or plan, but simply to sit by the fireplace and watch the dawn break. One morning, I found him rearranging the living room furniture, moving the Christmas tree now stripped of its most fragile decorations back to the center of the room, just as Barnaby had indicated. "I don't know why I'm doing this," he said, his voice thick with emotion as I watched him. "It just feels right." My sister, who had been so embarrassed by the goat's midnight escapades, began carrying a small photograph in her wallet. Barnaby, mid-bleat, surrounded by snow on our front porch. When her friends asked about it, she'd tell the story with a newfound pride, her eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in years. The barriers between her and my father began to crumble, replaced by conversations that were real and honest, about dreams and fears and the future she actually wanted for herself. My younger brothers, of course, were devastated when Barnaby disappeared. They spent hours searching the neighborhood, leaving notes on fence posts and offering rewards in crayon for the magic goat who loved Christmas. It was my mother who finally helped them understand that some things, and some beings, come into our lives for a reason, and when their purpose is fulfilled, they move on. "He taught us something important," she said, gathering the boys close one evening as we sat around the fireplace. "That sometimes the most precious gifts aren't the ones we can hold on to forever, but the ones that change us while they're here." As the new year began, we found ourselves carrying the lessons of that extraordinary Christmas into our daily lives. We started a new tradition: Sunday breakfasts where everyone had to share something unexpected that had happened during the week. No complaining, no judgment, just stories of the unplanned moments that brought joy or surprise. These breakfasts became the highlight of our week, a time when we learned to embrace the imperfections and uncertainties of life. I noticed something else too. We began noticing other people really noticing them. The elderly man who lived alone at the end of the street, the new family who had just moved in, the single mother struggling with 2 small children at the grocery store. We started reaching out in small ways, bringing cookies to Mr. Henderson, offering to help the new family move furniture, holding the door for the single mother at the store. These simple acts created ripples of connection in our community that we never could have planned. One afternoon, about a week after Christmas, my mother received a letter in the mail. It was from Eleanor, and inside was a photograph of Barnaby standing in a field of wildflowers, looking directly at the camera with those same intelligent dark eyes we had come to know so well. "He's happy," Eleanor had written. "And he misses you. But he says you don't need him anymore because you've found the magic within yourselves." That was his gift to you, not just the memories, but the ability to see wonder in the ordinary. We passed the photograph around, each of us tracing Barnaby's image with our fingers. In that moment, it felt as if he were still with us, not as a physical presence, but as a reminder of the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. As winter gave way to spring, something remarkable happened. The small circle of evergreen branches we had placed around the Christmas tree had dried and withered, but when we moved the furniture back to its usual places, we discovered that the branches had left an imprint on the hardwood floor, a perfect circle that was darker than the surrounding wood. "It's like a permanent reminder," my mother said, running her fingers over the circular mark, "of where we were, and where we're going." We decided to leave it there, not covering it with a rug or refinishing the floor. It became our own kind of sacred space, a place where we could sit and remember the night everything changed. The following Christmas, we recreated the tradition of placing the tree in the center of the room, surrounded by fresh evergreen branches. We didn't have a goat to guide us this time, but we didn't need one. We had learned to listen to that quiet voice within us, the one that reminds us to embrace the unexpected, to find joy in the chaos, to see the magic that hides in plain sight. As we gathered around the tree that second Christmas, something extraordinary happened. The silver bell that Eleanor had given us began to ring on its own, filling the room with its clear, resonant sound. We all froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. Then, from the window, we saw him, Barnaby, standing in the snow, watching us for a moment before turning and disappearing into the winter landscape once again. My father reached for the bell, his hand trembling slightly. "I think," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "he's just reminding us that magic is always there, if we know where to look." And as we stood there, united in the warmth of the moment, I couldn't help but wonder what other surprises this extraordinary Christmas journey might have in store for us. After all, with a goat who seemed to carry messages from beyond and a family that had learned to see the magic in the ordinary, who knew what other wonders might still be waiting to unfold? Years have passed since that extraordinary Christmas with Barnaby, but its magic has only grown stronger with time. What began as a bizarre, chaotic night has evolved into the cornerstone of our family identity, a story that gets retold at every gathering, every holiday, every milestone. When my siblings and I gather now, our children rolling their eyes as we begin, "You remember that Christmas with the goat?" There's a special kind of electricity in the room, a shared memory that transcends generations and connects us in ways nothing else can. I think about how strange that is, how one unexpected visitor, one night of chaos, could become so central to who we are. But that's the thing about Barnaby, about that Christmas. It wasn't just about the goat. It was about what the goat represented, the beauty of imperfection, the magic of the unexpected, the way life's most precious gifts often arrive wrapped in chaos and confusion. Our family gatherings now have a rhythm to them. The older generation starts, my parents telling the story with the fondness of people who lived through something remarkable. Then my siblings and I add our perspectives, the details we each remember differently. My older sister complaining about how mortified she was, my younger brothers talking about how they wished Barnaby had stayed, me marveling at the way he seemed to glow that Christmas morning. And then our children, who weren't even born yet, add their own interpretations, their wide-eyed questions, their attempts to make sense of a story that sounds more like a fairy tale than reality. "What was it really like, Grandma?" my oldest daughter asked last Christmas, as we sat around the fire, the traditional tree positioned in the center of the room just as Barnaby had indicated. "The goat. Was he really magical?" My mother smiled, her eyes twinkling. "I don't know about magical, sweetheart. But he was special. And he taught us something important." "What did he teach you?" my daughter pressed. My mother looked around at all of us, her gaze lingering on each face. "He taught us that the best things in life aren't the ones we plan or expect. They're the ones that surprise us, that challenge us, that force us to see the world differently." I thought about how that lesson has shaped my life. As I grew up, went to college, started a career, built a family of my own, I found myself returning to that Christmas again and again. When things didn't go according to plan, when life threw me curveballs I never saw coming, I'd think of Barnaby, of how his unexpected arrival had changed everything for the better. I remember one particular winter, years later, when my own family was going through a difficult time. We had moved to a new city, far from our extended family, and the holidays felt lonely and disconnected. Christmas Eve arrived, and instead of the joy and celebration I had grown up with, we found ourselves in a quiet, somber mood. My children, sensing the tension, were on their best behavior, but there was a distance between us that I didn't know how to bridge. That night, as I sat by the window watching the snow fall, I remembered Barnaby, remembered how he had appeared when we least expected him, how he had brought chaos but also connection. And in that moment, I knew what I needed to do. I went to the kitchen and pulled out the old silver bell that Eleanor had given us all those years ago. It had been sitting in a box in the attic, a treasured memento but not something we used regularly. I brought it out, rang it, the clear, resonant sound filling the quiet house, and then gathered my family around. "I want to tell you a story," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "About a Christmas goat." As I told them the story, about how Barnaby had arrived uninvited, about the chaos he had caused, about the way he had ultimately brought our family together, I saw something remarkable happen. The tension that had filled the room began to dissolve, replaced by the same sense of wonder and connection I had felt all those years ago. By the time I finished, my children's eyes were wide with fascination, and my spouse was looking at me with a renewed sense of understanding. "I think," my spouse said quietly, "we've been taking ourselves too seriously this Christmas." And just then, something happened that sent chills down my spine. From outside, we heard a sound, a bleat, clear and distinct, echoing through the winter night. We all froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. Could it be? After all these years? We rushed to the window, peering out into the snow-covered darkness. And there, standing on our porch, illuminated by the outdoor light, was a goat. Not Barnaby, this one was smaller, with different coloring, but a goat nonetheless. It looked directly at us, as if it knew we were watching, then turned and trotted away, disappearing into the night. My younger daughter, who had been silent until now, pointed a small finger toward where the goat had been. "He's coming back," she whispered. "The magic is coming back." In that moment, I understood. The goat had never really left. He had become part of our family's DNA, a reminder that magic is always there, if we know where to look. That Christmas, like that night with Barnaby, became different from any we had experienced before. Not because of the goat that appeared, but because of the connection it inspired, the way it reminded us to embrace the unexpected, to find joy in the chaos, to see the magic that hides in plain sight. Years have passed since then, and our family has grown. My children are now adults, with their own families and traditions of their own. But when they come home for the holidays, when we gather around the fire, the story of Barnaby is always there, woven into the fabric of our celebrations, a reminder of where we came from, of what truly matters. I think about how this story has evolved over time, how each generation adds its own layer, its own interpretation. My grandchildren now ask questions I never thought to ask, see connections I never made. To them, Barnaby is not just a character in a family story, he's a symbol, a reminder that life's most precious gifts often arrive in the most unexpected packages. What I've come to understand, as I've carried this story with me through the years, is that Barnaby was never really about the goat. He was about us, about how we responded to chaos, how we connected in unexpected ways, how we learned to see magic in the ordinary. He was a mirror, reflecting back to us our own capacity for wonder, for connection, for joy. And isn't that what Christmas is really about? Not the perfect presents or the ideal decorations, but the moments that remind us of what truly matters, the connections we make, the love we share, the magic we find in the most unexpected places. As I sit here now, thinking about all the Christmases that have passed since that extraordinary night with Barnaby, I find myself wondering about your own stories. What unexpected visitors have arrived at your door? What chaotic moments have become your most cherished memories? What magic have you found in the ordinary, in the unexpected, in the things you never planned for? Because I've come to believe that life's greatest gifts don't come in perfectly wrapped packages. They come in the moments that take us by surprise, the moments that challenge us to see the world differently, the moments that remind us that magic is always there, if we know where to look. And sometimes, all it takes is a goat on Christmas Eve to remind us of that truth. As the years have passed since that extraordinary Christmas with Barnaby, I've often found myself wondering about the nature of magic and where we might expect to find it. In fairy tales and holiday movies, magic typically arrives with grandeur through sleigh bells, sparkling lights, or mystical beings. But what if the true magic of Christmas isn't in the spectacular, but in the unexpected? What if it's hidden in the chaotic, the inconvenient, the moments that disrupt our carefully laid plans? I've come to believe that the most meaningful Christmas memories aren't the ones we plan meticulously or photograph perfectly. They're the ones that catch us off guard, the ones that make us laugh when we want to cry, the ones that remind us that life's most precious gifts often arrive wrapped in chaos and confusion. Barnaby taught us that lesson. He wasn't the gift we wanted, but he was the gift we needed. Think about your own Christmases. Which memories stand out most vividly? Is it the year everything went according to plan, with the perfect meal, beautifully wrapped gifts, and harmonious family gatherings? Or is it the year the turkey burned, the power went out, or a surprise visitor turned everything upside down? For most of us, it's the latter, the imperfect moments that somehow feel more real, more alive, more connected to the true spirit of the season. There's something powerful about embracing imperfection during the holidays. We put so much pressure on ourselves to create the perfect Christmas, to find the right gifts, cook the perfect meal, decorate the house just so. But what if, instead of striving for perfection, we embraced the beautiful messiness of real life? What if we allowed room for the unexpected, for the moments that don't fit our carefully constructed plans? Barnaby forced us to do that. He disrupted our traditions, challenged our expectations, and made us laugh at our own attempts at control. In doing so, he created space for something more authentic, more meaningful to emerge. He reminded us that the spirit of Christmas isn't in the perfection of our celebrations, but in the connections we make, the love we share, and the joy we find in the unexpected. I think about how that Christmas changed our family dynamic in ways we never could have planned. It broke down barriers between my sister and my father, creating a space for honest conversation that had been missing for years. It brought our neighbors together in ways that went beyond polite hellos and occasional small talk. It taught us to see the magic in ordinary moments, to find wonder in the chaos, to appreciate the gifts that come in unexpected packages. These are lessons we carry with us long after the Christmas decorations have been put away and the last of the leftovers have been eaten. They shape how we approach challenges, how we connect with others, how we find joy in everyday life. They remind us that the most transformative experiences often come when we least expect them, when we're forced to adapt and grow and see the world differently. As I've shared this story over the years, I've been struck by how many people have responded with their own versions of Christmas goats, unexpected visitors, chaotic moments, unplanned detours that ultimately became their most cherished memories. There was the woman whose power went out on Christmas Eve, leading her family to spend the evening telling stories by candlelight, creating connections that had been missing for years. There was the man whose flight was cancelled, stranding him in a strange town for Christmas, where he was welcomed into the home of strangers who became like family. There was the family whose dog destroyed their Christmas tree, leading them to venture out in the snow to find a new one, an adventure that became their favorite tradition. These stories share something important in common. They all involve disruption, chaos, the unexpected. Yet they're the stories people remember, the ones that get told year after year, the ones that capture the true spirit of the season. They remind us that Christmas isn't about perfection, it's about presence. It's not about getting everything right, it's about showing up authentically, with all our imperfections and uncertainties, and connecting with others in meaningful ways. In our fast-paced, image-conscious world, we often forget this truth. We get so caught up in creating the perfect holiday experience, documenting it for social media, ensuring every detail is just so that we miss the magic happening right in front of us. We're so busy capturing the perfect photo that we forget to actually experience the moment. We're so focused on creating the perfect memory that we miss the imperfect ones that often turn out to be the most meaningful. Barnaby taught us to slow down, to be present, to embrace the unexpected. He reminded us that the most precious moments aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that surprise us. They're the moments that make us laugh, that challenge us, that remind us of what truly matters. As we approach this Christmas season, I invite you to consider what your own Christmas goats might be. What unexpected moments might be waiting for you? What disruptions to your plans might actually be gifts in disguise? How might embracing imperfection lead to deeper connections, more authentic joy, and a greater appreciation for the true spirit of the season? I also invite you to share your own stories in the comments below. What are your most unconventional Christmas memories? What unexpected visitors have arrived at your door? What chaotic moments have become your most cherished traditions? When we share these stories, we create a community of people who understand that magic isn't always in the spectacular, it's often in the unexpected, the inconvenient, the moments that remind us to laugh, to connect, to find joy in the things we never planned for. Because that's what Barnaby taught us, that the most magical Christmases aren't the ones that go exactly according to plan. They're the ones that surprise us, challenge us, and ultimately remind us of what truly matters, the connections we make, the love we share, and the joy we find in embracing life's beautiful imperfections. So this Christmas, I encourage you to leave room for the unexpected. Say yes to opportunities that don't fit your plans. Embrace the moments that take you by surprise. And remember that sometimes, the most precious gifts arrive not in perfectly wrapped packages, but in the messy, unpredictable, utterly surprising moments that remind us to laugh, to connect, and to find magic in the ordinary. Because in the end, that's what Christmas is really about, not in the perfection of our celebrations, but in the magic of the moments we never saw coming. Not in the gifts we give or receive, but in the love we share. Not in the traditions we keep, but in the connections we make. And sometimes, all it takes is a goat on Christmas Eve to remind us of that truth.